Hello, world history students. This is Mr. Everton, and this is a Friday assignment, some vid notes, all about continuing our Unit 3 theme of Europe challenging authority. We're going to be talking about views that people had about government and how those views changed over time during this time period. So what are some responses to absolute monarchy that people had? So really the topic of this video is the Enlightenment. What was the Enlightenment? Well, it was when 17th century Europeans discovered it was lit. I'm sorry, what? Oh, apparently it's the Enlightenment. It's not, I apologize. The Enlightenment was the age of reason, and it's a term that historians use to describe the period from the 1600s into the 1800s in Europe. I got really confused for a second. During this time, people began to rely on their own knowledge. They began to recognize that they as individuals had the ability to think things through, and they started challenging old ways of doing things, old laws, old forms of government, particularly absolute monarchies like those practiced by Louis XIV of France and Charles I of Great Britain and Peter the Great of Russia. Oh, look, there's Louis XIV and Peter the Great and Charles I. So some things that helped contribute to the Enlightenment. Well, the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, people began to, remember we talked about the intellectual movement called humanism, where people began to focus on the individual, and they began to focus on logic and reason. Another event that contributed to the Enlightenment, the Protestant Reformation, where Martin Luther argued that individual people should be able to have their own relationship with God and that they don't need to go through the church, right? Like the Catholic Church was saying only the Catholic Church can interpret the Bible. And Martin Luther said individual people can interpret the Bible for themselves. Also, we talked about the scientific revolution, where people like Galileo started to make the argument that we should rely on observations and the scientific method in order to better understand the world and come to logical conclusions about things and not be stuck in the mindset of people who lived 1,000 years ago and were completely wrong about the way that the universe works. So the Enlightenment relies on reason, using reason and logic to solve problems. Specifically, problems associated with society and government. And we call this the Age of Reason, which lasted from the 17th or 1600s to the 19th century, the 1800s. And some results of the Enlightenment, the reason why this is a big deal is because it led to huge changes in government, changes like the American Revolution, which you might have heard of, I don't know. Sometimes in school in America, they talk about the American Revolution some. Also, believe it or not, there was another revolution, the French Revolution, which is when French people overthrew their government. We're going to get to that. So I want to end this video by going over some specific Enlightenment philosophers who all happen to be old and crusty and white, and tell you about some of the important ideas that they had. So this is John Locke. You may have heard of John Locke before because he's influential to Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence. Remember that from 6th grade? Of course you don't. But John Locke did do that. And he thought that the best form of government for any country was a limited monarchy, where the king had limits placed on their power. And he believed that people have what he called natural rights, rights to life, liberty, and property, which Jefferson turned into the pursuit of happiness because he thought it sounded nice. And John Locke said that people should rebel against the government when their rights aren't protected. When their rights are in danger, it is okay for them to rebel against the government. John Locke, natural rights. Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes believed that the best form of government was an absolute monarchy because he thought that people sucked. He thought that people were mean and cruel and that they would just do anything that they could, that they were basically wild animals, and that we all need to have an absolute ruler in place to force us to do the right thing. It's a very dark view of humanity, Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes didn't like people. Baron de Montesquieu. He had a bunch of other names, but we just call him Montesquieu because we try to keep it simpler. Also, look at all those extra French people with their extra vowels at the end. Did we really need the extra IEU at the end of his name? I don't think we did. Baron de Montesquieu, his big idea was the separation of powers. He believed that in any government, you ought to break the power up among a number of different people or groups of people, and that then those people will keep each other in check, right? You establish a system of checks and balances which keep any one person or group from having too much power. So if you divide the power, then people will be more likely to work together to use their power in order to solve problems, and no one person will run wild with things and take over everything. This is a very influential idea which was used by the founders of American democracy when they broke our government up into the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. You probably heard about that before, I'm thinking. Don't say no, because I'll call Mr. Piedra and I'll tell him that you're lying on him. I'm kidding. I don't know. He doesn't want to hear from me. Okay, this is Jacques Rousseau. He is another Enlightenment philosopher, and his main idea was called the social contract. And that means that rulers and the people who they rule have an agreement. They're working together. And the people, on their end, they agree to give the ruler power. That's where the ruler gets his power from, that the people believe the ruler should be in charge. And on the ruler's end, they protect the people's rights. And they make sure that people get the things that they need and that they're able to live lives of freedom and pursue property and all the things that John Locke said. So a social contract, the ruler and the people come to an agreement. Rousseau, social contract. And then finally, Voltaire. Look at Voltaire. He's such a scamp. He's got this little smirk on his face, like he knows something that we don't. Voltaire was all about some freedom of speech. He believed that people should be able to say what was important to them. A famous Voltaire quote that I'll read to you now. "I do not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." That was a very Voltaire statement to make. He believed that people ought to be able to speak freely. He also believed that we should have freedom of religion and that nobody should be forced to believe in any religion that they didn't want. And he said that there should be no official state religion, which in this time period was wild because most kings and queens, remember, claimed divine right of rule in Europe at this time period, and they all were saying that like they get their right to be in charge from God, and so you need to believe in the version of religion that they believe in because God is the one giving them power. And then Voltaire's like, no official state religions, which to us sounds normal, but back then Voltaire was tripping. All right, make sure you've answered all the questions. Those are the ends. That's the end of the Enlightenment philosophers that I have to discuss with you. Make sure you've answered all the multiple choice questions and then go do the summary question. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.